All right, welcome to the Explainer. If you're gearing up for that MEC 101 exam, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking the incredibly dense academic material of Block 5 and transforming it into the ultimate, highly structured study guide. I promise you clear summaries, direct takeaways, and most importantly, high-yield questions pulled straight from the source to make sure you are absolutely, totally prepared. So right here on the syllabus map, straight from our source material, you can see the exact 4 units we're going to conquer today. We're going to build our understanding step by step. We'll start with the basic approaches to welfare, move into some complex social functions, deal with real-world market failures, and finally, we'll tackle the heavy mathematics of social choice. Here's the game plan. Unit 13 covers Pigou versus Pareto. Unit 14 is social welfare functions. Unit 15 tackles market failures, and Unit 16 is social choice. And to keep things laser-focused, we'll end every single section with a high-yield test-yourself question.
Okay, starting off with Unit 13, Pigou versus Pareto.
Okay, let's dive into this by tracing the chronological evolution of welfare economics and putting 2 massive economic thinkers head-to-head. On one side, we have the Pigovian approach. Pigou was a cardinalist, meaning he actually thought welfare could be objectively quantified and measured. His big focus was on the obstacles to free movement and the gaps between private and social net products. His solution? State policy intervention. He genuinely believed the government needed to step in and manipulate things to improve welfare. On the flip side, we have the Paretian approach. Pareto was an ordinalist. He believed you can only rank preferences, not measure them perfectly. So Pareto's world relies heavily on the power of competitive equilibrium to optimize welfare, without that heavy-handed state interference. Now, let's see how this builds into the core of modern welfare economics, the fundamental welfare theorems. Think of these as the bridge between competitive markets and optimal resource allocation. The first fundamental welfare theorem states simply that every competitive equilibrium is Pareto optimal. The second fundamental welfare theorem kind of flips that around, stating that every Pareto optimal allocation can be achieved as a competitive equilibrium, but, and this is a really big but, it requires a suitable redistribution of initial wealth or endowments first. All right, time for our first high-yield exam question from the Check Your Progress section. The question is, what are the 2 fundamental welfare theorems? If you see this on the exam, remember to define both of them clearly. The first links competitive equilibrium directly to Pareto optimality. The second states that any Pareto optimal allocation can be reached via a competitive market, provided you first redistribute the initial wealth or endowments appropriately. Definitely lock that one in your memory. Moving right along to Unit 14, social welfare functions. So what happens when simple market efficiency just isn't enough? I mean, how do economists actually attempt to measure overall societal good when we have to weigh one person's gain against another person's loss? Well, to do this, economists must rely on something inherently unscientific, a value judgment. These are basically ethical beliefs about what is good or bad. Because welfare is an ethical term, any theorem incorporating it absolutely must rest on value judgments. For example, the text points out consumer sovereignty, the idea that an individual's preferences should count. That's a value judgment. We assume it's true, but it's not some undeniable scientific law. So how do we build a formula out of these judgments? One of the earliest attempts is the classical Benthamite equation you see here. W equals Y1 plus Y2, and so on. W is social welfare, and Y is the income of each individual. It's super straightforward. It simply aims to maximize the total income of the people in the society, completely regardless of how those incomes are distributed. Under this exact math, a billionaire finding a $20 bill on the street increases social welfare just as much as a starving person getting a hot meal. Kind of wild, right? Make it make sense. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why economics needed to evolve. Let's contrast that classical view with 2 later models. The Bergson-Samuelson social welfare function approaches this scientifically by basing it purely on the ordinal utility preferences of individuals. But then we have philosopher John Rawls, who completely flipped the script with his max-min criterion. Rawls argued that assuming individuals are risk-averse and have no idea where they'll end up in society, they would choose a system where welfare is only maximized when the utility of the least advantaged member is improved. Basically, no economic activity increases social welfare unless it directly helps the person who is worst off. Okay, here is your high-yield question for this unit. Write the general form of social welfare function. For the exam, you'll want to write down the Bergson-Samuelson general form straight from the text. W equals W of U1, U2, all the way out to UH.
You'll just explain that W, which is society's welfare, is a function of the ordinal utility indices of its constituent members or households.
Next up, Unit 15, Imperfect Market, Externality, and Public Goods.
Look, all these theories are fantastic on paper, but ideal market conditions fail all the time in the real world. Optimum welfare gets blocked by four main culprits, often grouped under market failure. They are imperfect competition, natural monopoly, imperfect knowledge or incomplete markets, and externalities. Whenever these are present, that pure competitive equilibrium we talked about back in Unit 13, it completely breaks down.
Let's zoom in on one of those major roadblocks real quick. An externality occurs when a decision creates costs or benefits for stakeholders other than the person actually making the decision. The classic example in the text is factory smoke impacting nearby residents. And it's really crucial to remember here that externalities can be positive or negative, and they can happen on both the supply side and the demand side. Time for some rapid recall with our Unit 15 exercise question. What is market failure? Account for its causes. You'll define market failure as the inability to obtain optimum welfare, and then just quickly list out those four causes we just covered: imperfect competition, natural monopoly, imperfect knowledge, and externalities. Boom, full marks right there. Finally, we hit Unit 16, Social Choice and Welfare. So how do we make collective democratic decisions? The ultimate goal of a democratic society is to use a social choice function. This is a general mechanism that takes a set of individual preference orders, what you want, what I want, what your neighbor wants, and magically transforms them into one coherent, global, societal preference order. Sounds pretty perfect, right? Well, let's see why it's actually incredibly problematic. So the crucial point here is Kenneth Arrow's impossibility theorem. Arrow said that for a social choice function to be fair and logical, it has to meet these 5 strict conditions. It must be complete, it must be transitive, it must have positive association or monotonicity, it's got to be non-dictatorial, and it must have independence of irrelevant alternatives. But here is the kicker. Arrow mathematically proved that if you have more than 2 alternatives, it is completely impossible to satisfy all 5 of these conditions at the exact same time. Essentially, he proved that a perfect democratic voting system is mathematically impossible. Majority rule can, and absolutely will, yield inconsistent results. Let's hit our final high-yield question. How is individual ordering of social states made according to Arrow's impossibility theorem? The key insight from the text here is that an individual's ordering does not solely depend on their personal consumption of goods and services. It actually heavily includes collective goods, things like municipal services, parks, and sanitation. An individual evaluates social states based on their own consumption, as well as the consumption of others in society. To conclude our syllabus review today, we have to talk about the overarching dilemma that limits the just distribution of social welfare. It's called the equity-efficiency trade-off. Take a look at this quote directly from the text. There is a limit to amend the existing state of distribution as determined by the market. What this basically means is that you cannot endlessly redistribute wealth for the sake of equity without eventually crushing the market's efficiency. As you sit down for your exam, I want you to consider this philosophical limit. How does this trade-off impact every single theorem, welfare function, and market failure you've just studied? Good luck on your MEC 101 exam, and keep questioning that delicate balance between what is efficient and what is truly just.